All right, we're going to be running through the WB1 residential listing contract today, the exclusive right to sell. So this is a listing contract for residential properties. This is not for condos. There is a separate document for condos, so just know that. But you would use this for a single family or a duplex up to a 4-family property. So the first thing I'm going to ask is that whenever you're using a contract is you take a look at the upper left-hand corner and double check the use date. So this is the most recent listing contract that we have as of the time of this recording. Optional use date was July 1st, 2024. Mandatory use date was August 15th, 2024. When new contracts come out, that will automatically be updated in zip forms. But just make sure if you have something printed, especially, that you just make sure that you are using the most recent contract. So let's run through it. 7 pages of fun that gives you the right to list a property. All right, so first line, seller gives the firm the exclusive right to sell the property on the following terms. Property description, we're going to have the street address. So this is where we're going to write in 123 Main Street or whatever the property address actually is. And we're going to define where it is as well. So we've got 123 Main Street, and we're going to say in the city. This would be where you'd write city, county, village, or not like city, county, city, village, town, however that place that it is located is designated in the city of Milwaukee, county of Milwaukee. If there's any additional description for the property, you can attach it. You can write it into like the addenda lines, the additional provisions, or you can attach it as an addenda. Inclusions in the list price. Seller is including in the list price the property, all fixtures that are not excluded on the lines 11 through 13, and the following items. This is where you're going to list out any appliances that are included. So let's say the oven, the refrigerator, dishwasher, microwave, washer, dryer, maybe the garbage disposals being left. And then also anything that would be owned by the seller that, like a water softener if it's owned. So property, fixtures, and then these extra things. What the seller would not list here necessarily is if they're saying like, hey, I want to leave all the furniture in the house. Or maybe they're saying that they want to, I'm going to leave the couch and the dresser that's tall in the second bedroom. Those things might be better suited for a bill of sale if they're including a lot of personal items with the property. If it's just, hey, everything as seen in the house and that's how you're going to write it, we're not going to list it all out. That's one thing. But if your seller is thinking about selling certain furniture, we are not going to be including that as part of our listing contract. You can, however, they could ask you to upload that to MLS. Maybe you're going to have a list of everything that's optional. Maybe they want to have something out there at showings. But not necessarily including every single thing like that. If there's something like a Ring doorbell that they want to be clear that that's being left, that's perfect. Sometimes people will also say like the trampoline in the backyard and the pool equipment is also being left. Maybe those are things that they'd include that just don't get into like, hey, and they're fine with leaving the lawnmower and they're fine with leaving all the garden tools. Like those things may be better for better suited for a bill of sale, something additional to enter into MLS. Not included in the list price would be the seller's personal belongings. If there's a tenant in the house, you could also write tenant's personal belongings. Maybe there's staging furniture. You could also include that. And then if there's something that the sellers will be bringing with them, maybe they have a refrigerator in the basement and they want to make sure that they're taking that to their new home. Maybe they have a water softener that they own, but they're renting an iron curtain. That would not be included. So it says on lines 14 and 15, caution, identify fixtures to be excluded by the seller or which are rented and will continue to be owned by the lessor. So for the iron curtain, for example, the new buyers could contact the leasing company and they could reach out and say, hey, I'd like to leave it here. I want to continue the lease. It doesn't necessarily need to be moved out, but the sellers don't have the right to transfer that with the property. Line 16 has our list price. If you type it out here where it's numbers, it will fill in the price. So let's say that we are listing this for $750,000. It's a very fancy property. And then it will write it out like in words, $750,000. And then we've got numbers here. Marketing. Seller authorizes the firm and its agents to agree to use reasonable efforts to market the property. Seller agrees that the firm and its agents may market the seller's personal property identified on lines 7 to 10 during the term of this listing. The marketing may include, sometimes agents will write standard KW marketing procedures. If you have, if you're on a team, maybe you say, standard, whatever your team's name, Team Awesome, marketing procedures. If you have, if you're a solo agent, you could still say standard KW marketing procedures. Maybe you want to say open houses, entry into the MLS, listing, just listed postcards. So whatever it is that you are including, the caution I would have for you is it says that they may include those, the marketing may include these items, but I don't want to list something on here if I'm not certain that I'm going to do it. I don't want to say just listed postcards and then not send them out. So I always tell sellers that I'm going to do whatever it takes to get their house sold, and it's going to include some of these things. The firm and its agents may advertise the following concessions, incentives, or special financing offered by the seller, which are in addition to and separate from the compensation to others. So this might be if I wanted to offer a home warranty, or the sellers are offering a home warranty, we could put that here. If the sellers wanted to include a credit for carpet, so they could say a $2,000 closing cost credit for new carpet. The tricky part about that is we can't advertise those things in the MLS. You're going to have to communicate that those closing cost credits that someone may want to offer separately outside of the MLS. This is also where you would write in if your seller is offering concessions in lieu of commission for a buyer's agent. So let's say my seller says, hey, I want the buyer's agent to write their commission into the offer to purchase. I might say 2.4% of purchase price as a concession. Is our concession there. So that's an option. What a lot of agents I'm finding are doing is they are leaving buyer agent commission and concessions blank and asking agents to write it into the offer to purchase. So you can put it into your listing contract. One option is to put it here on line 22. I'll show you another option in just a second. And the third option is to leave the buyer agent commission blank to make sure that, and just ask agents to write it into the offer. Best practice is still to talk to sellers and let them know that someone is likely going to write it into their offer to purchase. It's just that, are we advertising it and like letting people know this, or are we just asking people to write it into their offer? So concessions offered in the MLS cannot be limited to or conditioned on the retention of or payment to a cooperating firm, buyer's firm, or other buyer's representative. This just means we can't tell the buyer what to use their credit for. So if we say you get a credit for 2.4% of purchase price, the buyer's probably going to want to use that to pay their buyer's agent, but maybe they don't. Maybe they want to pay their buyer agent cash and keep that money themselves. It's up to them. So we can't dictate what it's for. The seller has a duty to cooperate with the marketing efforts of the firm and its agents. So there are some lines about the firm's role as the marketing agent, the seller's duty to notify the firm of any potential buyers. The seller agrees that the firm and its agents may market other properties during the term of this listing. It's exclusive for the buyer agent to work with the seller, but sellers or buyers, it's exclusive for the seller to work with their agent, but listing agents do work with other people at the same time. There we go. I got it. Commission. So seller and the firm agree that the firm's commission shall be blank. So a couple of options here. This may be where you put in your commission. Let's say that we did say that they wanted to include 3% of purchase price as a concession, and then my buyer agent commission might be 3% of purchase price as well. So that might be how I write it. If my seller decides to leave commission out of the listing contract and asks agents just to write it into their offer to purchase and it's negotiable, maybe this is just where I'd write my own then. So whatever my own commission is going to be, that I would write that in here. So here's what I charge. So that's my commission alone. Here's my caveat now. If your seller wants to say, hey, you know what? I want to guarantee that commission. There's going to be a separate form that the buyer's agent is going to sign to say that they are agreeing to accept commission. And then what I'm going to do is put the total amount of commission for buyer agent and listing agent here. So let's say it's going to be 6% of purchase price. And then we're going to skip this section for a second. And then we'll go down here, and whatever the compensation to others is going to be goes here. So this is where then the buyer's agent commission would be. So a couple choices. And when you take your first listing, let your PC coach know, and we will walk through your options and what to think of and how to get that ready to go. So let's pretend that I've said my seller has decided that they are going to be writing their commission. Buyer's agents want to write commission into the offer to purchase. So I'm just going to put down my commission as the listing agent on line 30 here. We'll keep it simple for this one. And then the next lines talk about how commission is earned. So I do run through this section with sellers just to let them know that, hey, let's talk about how I get paid. I get paid on commission. It's not a dirty word. It means that I am working hard to get them the most money and to get them an offer as quickly as possible, get them sold. So seller shall pay the firm's commission, which shall be earned if during the term of this listing, the seller sells or accepts an offer which creates an enforceable contract for the sale of all or any part of the property. The seller grants an option to purchase, which is exercised. The seller exchanges or enters into a binding exchange agreement. A transaction occurs which causes an effective change in ownership or control of part of the property, or a ready, willing, and able buyer submits a bona fide written offer to seller or the firm at or above the list price and on substantially the same terms set forth in this listing and the current WB1 offer to purchase or WB11 offer to purchase, even if the seller does not accept the buyer's offer. A buyer is ready, willing, and able when the buyer submitting the written offer has the ability to complete the buyer's obligations under the written offer. Phew, what does this mean? This means that either the home sells or I bring the seller an offer at or above list price with no contingencies, and the seller says, no, thank you. So those are some of the ways that we could have this contract fulfilled, and then I would earn my commission. The firm's commission shall be earned if during the term of this listing, one seller of the property sells, conveys, or exchanges or options as described above, except or to another owner, except by divorce judgment. So if somebody decides to sell them out, so those are the options. Due and payable. Once earned, the firm's commission is due and payable in full at either the earlier of closing or the date set for closing, even if the transaction does not close, unless otherwise agreed to in writing. Some sellers feel a little antsy about that language of even if the transaction does not close. And this is where I think it's important to have a conversation about when would you be following up with them about commission? Maybe it's that instance where you brought them a ready, willing, and able buyer at or above asking price that was able to buy this house and no contingencies present, and you've earned your commission, and the seller's decided not to sell. Or maybe the seller accepts an offer, we get through all of our contingencies, and then the seller decides not to sell. So those are always some situations where even if the transaction does not close, that you could have earned your commission. Otherwise, it's at closing. So calculation, it is the percentage commission shall be calculated based on the following if earned. So it's how are we calculating that commission? And most of the time it's going to be the total offered purchase price. That's option 5. That's the most common. And then let's see, note a commission is earned for a portion of the property if it does not terminate the listing as to any remaining property. So if like they sell off part of the land and that was part of the contract, how often is this happening that somebody's just selling part of their property? I don't see it often. And it may be that you guys are renegotiating your listing contract to include something or exclude something. Doesn't happen often. I will say at the start of the top of page 2, Zip Forms doesn't always include all of the information. It'll pull some of this, but let's say that we have to make sure that we are, if we stop typing, let's see. So we've got, just fill in your state. Oh, that's why, because I wrote in the city. So it will then auto fill for the other pages as well. Compensation to others. So like I mentioned, this is if we want to be able to tell people that, hey, tell other buyers agents, hey, we have this definite compensation. And there is a separate form that the buyer's agent would sign to accept that compensation. So if we were including that, then I would include that in my total commission above. On line 61 and 62, there is no standard market commission rate. Commissions and types of service may vary by firm. Commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. Important for sellers to know. Buyer financial capability. The firm and its agents are not responsible under Wisconsin statutes or regulations to qualify a buyer's financial capability. So the seller can make sure that if they want to confirm a buyer's financial capability, they can negotiate some different, like the qualification of a lender. They can negotiate the inclusion of a financing contingency, a proof of funds. What I tell sellers is I am not personally checking the buyer's financial capability. I'm not going to check their proof of funds unless they provide it to us. I'm not going to be, checking to make sure that they have enough equity in the sale of a property. I'm going to ask that be included as a contingency. So we're not personally, I'm not personally giving them a pre-approval, but we'll get a pre-approval from a lender for them. From them as well. Dispute resolution. If there is a dispute about the listing that can't be resolved by mutual agreement, the parties may consider alternative dispute resolution instead of judicial resolution in court. So that can include mediation and binding arbitration. So that's where we always start before going to suing, is always the goal. Fair housing, just remember that there are protected classes for federal, state, and even by county, and that we're just going to make sure that we are not going to discriminate against any prospective buyer on account of those protected classes. Disclosure to clients. So under Wisconsin law, a brokerage firm and its brokers and salespersons owe certain duties to all parties of a transaction. So this is whether or not you are even if you don't have a buyer agency or a listing contract signed, these are some duties that you owe to anybody just because of your statute as a brokerage, as a real estate salesperson in the state of Wisconsin. So you have a duty to provide brokerage services fairly and honestly, to exercise reasonable skill and care in providing brokerage services, to provide accurate information about market condition within a reasonable time if they request it, to disclose material adverse facts about a property, to protect your confidentiality. So no confidential information is going to be shared with other parties. The duty to safeguard trust funds and other property that the firm or its agents hold, that's earnest money. And the duty when negotiating to present contract proposals in an objective and unbiased manner and to disclose the advantage and disadvantages of the proposals. But then when you have a listing contract signed, you owe additional duties to your client. You are the seller is the client of the firm, and so you owe them additional duties. So you have to be able to provide them on line 93. You have to be able to provide them advice and information on real estate matters that affect their transaction. Material facts, not just the material adverse facts, not just the defects of the property or the bad things to know, but all material facts, anything that would be important to the seller. That we're going to fulfill obligations and fulfill their lawful requests that are within the scope of the agency agreement, that we're going to negotiate for them, and that we will not place our interests ahead of our seller's interests. The firm and its agents will not, unless required by law, give information or advice to other parties who are not the firm's clients if giving information or advice is contrary to the seller's interests. So if you become involved in a transaction which another party is also the firm's client, a multiple representation relationship, different duties may apply. So that's the next section. So I always just like to let sellers know that because we have a listing contract signed, they're my client. I put their interest above all others. I'm going to negotiate on their behalf. I'm going to be giving them advice and just making sure that I am doing everything I can to get them the best outcome. So multiple representation relationships and designated agency. It comes into play if the firm, Keller Williams, has an agency agreement with more than one client who's a party in the same transaction. So that means that maybe I have the seller in this instance, and another agent in my office is writing an offer for their buyer client. So that this just defines what happens then. That different agents from the firm will negotiate on behalf of me and the other client, and the duties will remain the same. Each agent will provide their client with information, opinions, and advice, and to assist them in negotiations. Each client is going to receive information, opinions, and advice that will assist the client, even if it gives that client advantages in negotiation over the firm's other client. So I'm working for my client, and the other agent is working for their client, even though we work at the same firm. No confidential information is being shared still. We're still going to be fulfilling our brokerage duties. But here's the question. If you do not consent to a multiple representation relationship, the firm will not be allowed to provide brokerage services to more than one client in the transaction. So what does that mean? So let's say I have the listing and another agent in the office writes an offer that is great. So, okay, top box here on line 123 says that the same firm may represent me and the other party as long as the same agent is not representing us both. That's fine. So I'm going to represent my client. They're going to represent the other client is going to represent, or other agent would represent their client. The same firm may represent me as option 2 and the other party, but the firm must remain neutral regardless if one or more different agents are involved. So what this means is that if I have the listing and the other agent has the buyer, I have to stay neutral. We can't give advice to our clients, because if that box is checked, that means that we just have to, we can write the offer, we can accept the offer, I can give information, but I cannot give advice, and neither can the other agent. The third box says that neither firm can, that the same firm cannot represent both parties in the transaction. So that means that if somebody else writes an offer on my listing, I can't even, we can't work together. They represent multiple representation relationships. So the top box is the one that's going to give the clients the most access to your advice and to your knowledge, your experience, and to more buyers, because we're allowing other KW agents to show the property. None of these boxes mean that you as the agent can represent multiple people. It just means that what it means is that, like, I can represent my seller, and that I can still write an offer for a customer, a buyer customer. I'm going to always represent my seller's interests. So everybody has to consent to the selection checked above. So if one person has the second box checked in a transaction, that means that that we have to go with the second box. If all parties, if one party has the third box checked, we have to go with the third box. So just know that it doesn't have to be that everybody checks the same box. It would just mean that, like, one person checks that, now we all have to stay neutral. Subagency, your firm may, with your authorization in the agency agreement, engage other firms, subagent firms, to assist your firm by providing brokerage services on your behalf. So this just means that we can work with other brokerages to help as subagents. Maybe somebody writes an offer as a seller's agent, even though they are working with a different brokerage. Please review this information carefully. An agent can answer your questions about brokerage services, but you need legal advice, tax advice, or a professional home inspection, can contact an attorney, tax advisor, or home inspector. Then we've got confidentiality notice. So the thing that I let sellers know here is that I'm going to keep their information confidential unless there is something that they would like me to share. I typically don't write anything on lines 157 and 160, confidential information or non-confidential information. A couple of exceptions to this. I have had a couple of clients who have been moving for a job transfer, and maybe they would like me to share that information. I would then write that on line 160. So seller property is only available because of a job transfer. Typically that would be personal information, but maybe they would like me to share that to let the potential buyers know that they didn't want to move. The house is great. I love it. I'm just moving because I have a job offer somewhere else. Cooperation, access to property, or offer presentation. So this just says that the parties agree that the firm and its agents will work and cooperate with other firms and agents in marketing the property, including firms acting as subagents and firms representing buyers. Cooperation includes providing access to the property for showing purposes, presenting offers, and other proposals from these firms to the seller. If there is any firm that the seller doesn't want us to work with, they could have it listed there on line 166 and 167. And let the seller know that this was going to decrease the amount of access to the house, the number of potential buyers that they're able to show their house to. So it even says on line 168, caution, limiting the firm's cooperation with other firms may reduce the marketability of the property. Exclusions. All persons who may acquire an interest in the property who are protected buyers under a prior listing contract are excluded from this listing. So what that means is, let's say this property was listed before within 7 days of the date of listing, the seller should deliver a list of all protected buyers. So that means everybody who saw the house before when it was listed, or wrote an offer before, or came through an open house, anybody like that, the seller needs to provide a list of those protected buyers to the firm within 7 days. If the house wasn't listed before, this isn't going to apply. And then the following other buyers are excluded from this listing until blank. These buyers are no longer excluded from this listing after the specified date unless on or before they have accepted a written offer from the buyer or sold the property to the buyer. So one time I had a seller who, there was a friend that they thought may buy the house. So we listed that friend's name on line 173 and then gave them like a week or 10 days to be able to see the house and write a contract on it. They didn't end up doing it, but it's not very often that there's someone interested. But if there is a buyer who's excluded from this contract, you would put them there on line 173. Then we have a whole bunch of definitions starting on line 177. I always point out to sellers that the definition of deadlines is that deadlines are expressed as a number of days from an event, and that doesn't it's calendar days. There's no weekends and holidays in real estate. So just letting them know if we're working with timelines, we're not counting business days, we're counting days. Definition of a fixture is listed here as well. So that's on line 191. We have what is a fixture? Something that is physically attached to or so closely associated with the property to make sure that the house wouldn't work without it. So the idea that we say for fixtures, if you take the house and you turn it upside down and you shake it, what's still attached? Your light fixtures, your cabinetry, things that are built into the house would still be expected to stay. And then also things like the water heater, the furnace are going to also be expected to stay. And then there's a list of things that, maybe are not certain, but things like an installed security system, blinds and shutters, screen and storm doors, plants, garden bulbs, shrubs and trees. I've had sellers who are landscapers who have listed out specific plants that they wanted to take with them to their new home. They marked them with a little flag so that any potential buyers knew that they were going to be digging up that space, putting soil there so that buyers could plant something else, but that they intended to take those plants with them. So anything that's listed here, if you on line 191 to 201, if your seller would like to take it with them, make sure that you include it in the exclusions list on the first page. So some more definitions, I'll let you read through these. Definitions about what is the property, what's a protected buyer, and that brings us down to page 5 then. So extension of listing starting on line 230, the listing term is extended for a period of 1 year as to any protected buyer. So if, let's say your property, you list it and it doesn't close, you would give the protected buyer list to the seller. So if they relist the property, they would give that to their new firm. And then if one of those buyers popped back up, this contract would come back into play and you would be the agent working with the seller on the contract then. Occupancy, unless otherwise provided, the seller agrees to give the buyer occupancy at the time of closing. So that means that keys will be provided to the seller on closing day unless negotiated otherwise. The property should be in broom swept condition and free of all debris and personal property, except for personal property belonging to the current tenants, sold to the buyer or left with the buyer's consent. What happens if the property is leased? If the property is currently leased and the leases will extend beyond closing, the seller shall assign their rights and transfer all security deposits and prepaid rents to the buyer at closing. I always recommend, if we have leased property, I would recommend including an addendum R in the offer to purchase. Make sure that that's included there. So there's a lot of extra language beyond what's here on line 238 to 242. Starting on line 243, notice about the sex offender registry. So that's going to be on every contract that's signed. So I just pointed out to the clients. Line 246, the seller is going to agree to complete the real estate condition report to the best of their knowledge, and they'll amend it if there is anything new that comes up. Seller representations regarding defects. The seller represents to the firm that as of the date of the property, they have no knowledge of defects other than those listed in the real estate condition report. And then it's important if it's bold and capital letters, warning on line 254. If the seller representations are incorrect or incomplete, the seller may be liable for damages and costs. Seller cooperation with marketing efforts. The seller's agreeing to cooperate with the firm and the firm's marketing efforts, and to provide the firm with all records, documents, or other materials that are connected with the sale. Let's see. So we're also going to make sure that we allow the house to go on the MLS, internet advertising, a lockbox on the property. And then if somebody comes up to the door of the property, the seller is going to probably refer that person to the firm to make sure that they're reconnected with an agent during the term of the listing. Open house and showing responsibilities. The seller is aware that there's a potential risk of injury, damage, and or theft involving persons attending an individual showing or an open house. The seller should be responsible for preparing the property to minimize the likelihood of injury, damage, and loss. There's a hold harmless here. And then the seller acknowledges that if an appraiser or inspector is here, they don't have to be accompanied by an agent, but buyers have to be. If a buyer is present, then an agent has to be present at all times. The thing I say to sellers here is put your valuables away and if there's medications in the bathroom medicine cabinet, I would put those in a personal drawer instead of in a medicine cabinet. If a buyer has an emergency and has to use the restroom, I am not following them in. And, if the door is closed, I can't see if they're opening the medicine cabinet. I've been at home inspections where sellers have left cash out on their bedside table. Please don't do that. Tell them the whole time the house is listed, if someone is in the house, please put your valuables away. Lock up all guns as well. If there are guns in the property, they need to be in a locked gun safe. Jewelry, valuables, medications should all be out of reach. Termination of listing starting on line 273. Neither the firm nor the seller has the right to unilaterally terminate this listing absent a breach of contract by the other party. So what I tell sellers is that they should let me know in writing if there is something that they would like to change. But basically, if we're going to be canceling the contract or making a change to the timeline, that we have an amendment that we would sign, that they would sign and I would sign. Sometimes if you're reducing commission or terminating the contract, you would also have our supervising broker sign as well. Earnest money is held in a trust account until closing. And then the thing to let them know is that if there is a dispersal of earnest money, if the transaction does not close, that all parties are going to sign a one-page cancellation agreement that they agree to what happens to the earnest money, to make sure that we have that all in writing and agreement. Delivery of documents and written notices. Personal delivery on line 293 is always going to be an option for sellers. So you can hand them documents. For most sellers, email is going to be the preferred method. Other than that, if there is a seller recipient for delivery, let's say the seller has, they want their they don't have email and they want their son-in-law to get emails, you could put the son-in-law's information here. If they have an attorney that they want to receive documents, that works as well. That's who usually would be there. And then firm's recipient for delivery is typically going to be you. So you can write that in there as well. Fax is an option. Commercial delivery is an option. U.S. mail is an option. But for most people, the thing that they check is line 307 here, where it says email, and then the email address for the seller, and then the email address for the firm. Additional provisions, if there's anything extra that you're listing here, something that maybe didn't fit on one of the other lines, you could put it here. Some common things might be if this is a single party listing contract, if this is a delayed listing, maybe you want to make a note of that. Any of those special situations, you might put something in additional provisions. And then if you're attaching any addenda, so typically the addenda that would be attached here might be like a delayed listing form from our MLS. And then you have the term of the contract. So this would be the date that the contract is going to go, that the house is going to go into MLS. So if you are like, it doesn't have to be today's date that we're, so if I sign it today, but let's say the seller doesn't want showings to start for a week, I really should not sign it active today. I should sign it active for a week. So today is August 18th. So let's say the sellers would like this to start in a week. So let's say they'd like it to start August 25th. They can sign it today to go active on August 25th. That's totally fine. You could sign it today to go active January 1st. You could sign it today to go active any date. And then you have to have an expiration date in here as well. There is no standard expiration date. I would say give yourself enough time to market the property, get an accepted offer, and get it closed. The shortest I typically see is like 2 months. So maybe they want to do the 25th of October. I personally usually will list for 6 months unless a seller requests something else. Wire fraud warning here is here on page 7. So wire fraud is a real and serious risk. Wiring directions should come directly from a bank. I'm never going to give wiring directions. I'm never going to ask for their financial information. So if there is a wire being sent, they should just confirm things over the phone is always the best practice. And then there's a spot for sellers to sign. So you've got a space here for 4 sellers. So line 356 to 363 could be where sellers are signing. If the seller is an entity, so it's an LLC or it's a business, it's a trust, it's not a person, it is an entity, you would sign on line 364. Or you would write the name here on line 364. So let's say it's Good House LLC. And then your authorized signer's name would go here. So it would be Mr. Buyer, Mr. Seller. You wouldn't actually write Mr. I would write Bob Seller. And his title would be member of the LLC. Maybe that's his title. So if it's a person, they'd sign on line 356. If it is an entity, they'd sign on line 366. And then you, the listing agent, will sign on line 368. And then you should just fill out your name and your firm here as well. That is the listing contract for a residential listing. So hopefully this was helpful. It's not as complex usually as the offer to purchase to run through, but it is important to understand it as you are explaining it to a seller.